and dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. A lot of different news I want to get into. Something that has been one of the key features of Donald Trump and the Republican debates is immigration. And most of you know I'm a libertarian. I'm for open borders, but for open borders, you would have to have no government. Otherwise, it's, in essence, controlled borders. And what we see going on with our immigration, with Europe's immigration, it's being controlled where they are playing two sides, where they'll let the bad people in along with the good people. That way, they can basically divide and conquer within a nation, and we see that here. We see that over in Europe. Here was one that was cross-drudge. Daily Mail. Migrant crisis sparks Germany's worst spat of political violence. It says here, Germany has endured its worst few weeks of civil unrest and politically motivated violence since the days of the Nazis. Police officers, politicians, journalists, but above all, refugees have been the target of thugs protesting the country's open-door policy towards migrants. The refugee crisis has changed Germany, and while Chancellor Angela Merkel believes it will be ultimately for the better, the dark parallels with the past continue to mount up. Anti-immigration protesters marched through the streets of a German city. Germany has endured its worst civil unrest these last few weeks. And basically they're saying the hate is back. The hate is back. And there's a lot of us that have warned about it, but then, you also have a lot of libertarians. It's open borders, who cares? It's not about whether you want people to come here or not. It's about the government control. It's not open borders. It's controlled borders. Because they are allowing them in a mass flux after they've held them back for how long. And it's being done for certain types of reasons, and we'll kind of get into another part of that. But we'll go ahead and start off with Ron Paul Liberty Report. Is Germany's migrant crisis leading to war.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. Want to address the subject of what's going on in Europe. People are talking a lot about it. It looks like the migration problem is not going away. It may be building, and the consequence of the migrants coming into these countries is looking like there's a significant change socially and economically in these countries. And there are some alarm bells set out, and Zero Hedge had an interesting article on this and just how massive it is. And there's an alternative party in Germany which is doing, a lot better. And they were warning this could be chaos. It could be sliding towards civil war and anarchy and all these kind of things. So I guess trying to sort this all out, there are still a lot of people very supportive of serious problems with migrants coming in, escaping some very tough times. And then there's a lot of other questions that are being asked. So we want to look at that in a little bit. We'll put up a map about this. But what about this alternative party for Germany? Usually when there's chaos there and the ordinary parties aren't doing well, it's not unusual for another party to come into existence.
Yeah, it's a party that was formed in 2013. It's a moderately Eurosceptic populist party. They were formed in 2013. There were German federal elections that year. They just missed the threshold of 5% for representation in parliament. But now, according to national polls, they're up to about 7%. One of their main platforms that started out being against bailouts, and that's what got them popular with the Greece crisis and these sorts of things. But now they're talking about the migrant crisis. And it is a pretty interesting party because it was the person who's now in charge is a woman PhD chemist who is also an entrepreneur and runs a company that manufactures some sort of plastic product. So it's sort of the old German burger class is attracted, I think, to this party.
Yeah. The old saying about a picture being very valuable, and you can talk a long time and you can't quite visualize it, but we have this picture of this map now of Europe, which appeared first for me on Zero Hedge. But it really shows how massive it is, and you can see and hopefully the audience can see these dots on this map moving and where they're coming from. And the map is supposed to represent where there's every single dot. It represents a busload of people, or the equivalent of 25 people. And it's constant, and you can see which direction they're going into Germany in particular. And Merkel has been so generous in accepting them, which means generous in forcing the people of Germany to accept these problems. So I think that this really shows how bad things are and where they're coming from. But people are speaking out. An official from Bavaria, Peter Bibert or something, he was saying that he's putting his foot down. Bavaria will take 1,800 and the rest are going to Berlin. So that's why people are concerned about how serious it is. And I think there's another example of how crazy this is. There was one town of 102 people. They said that they will be required, or maybe they've already accepted or put 1,000 migrants into a town like that. And I was jokingly but sadly saying, yeah, now that they're there, they get to vote. And you can see why people in Germany, especially with the economic conditions deteriorating in Europe, and what it means for the European Union.
You can almost feel the pressure building in Germany. Germany has a kind of, because of history, has a lot of psychological burdens, and people who are opposed to this immigration have been demonized as xenophobes. But I think the migration inward is so great and the pressure is building so much that I think it feels like there's an explosion about to happen, and they can no longer contain them by just saying you're a xenophobe. And it looks to me like Merkel's days are numbered.
And people are arguing, what is the cause? And some they'll say, well, you're just not generous in helping people who are destitute or facing political crises. But my estimation is that it's probably many faceted causes for this. Certainly I put a lot of blame and responsibility on our own country because, as that map showed, where were they coming from? Africa, where we've been involved for years, but the Middle East in particular, where we're constantly involved. Of course, the British and other European countries have supported these wars as well. But total chaos there, and the people are leaving, so that is understandable. But then there are others who would like to put it more in the form of a conspiracy and saying, oh, this is deliberate, this couldn't be spontaneous. I think this is a little bit more of a stretch. But if you were arguing the case for world government, and world government is an accepted alternative to total world chaos, you have to stop and think, could anybody be motivated to do this, to have this type of chaos for that purpose?
Yeah, we talked about before the show that it's probably more likely a number of forces at work. But, Hungary, which is kind of in the middle of this firestorm, the Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, who's kind of a firebrand himself, he accused philanthropist George Soros, because Soros gives millions of dollars to pro-migration NGOs, and he accused him of wanting to push these migrants into Europe to destroy national borders. And, of course, he was demonized for saying that, but actually a few days later, Soros wrote a letter in response, and he accepted that he is doing this, and he said, quote, national borders are the obstacle.
Right. I often wonder where they're coming from, because in very general terms, I like the idea of world integration in a voluntary sense. Mm-hmm. Having market-type money like a gold standard, then you get rid of the central banks. But I always think that if our country had limited itself to what the founders tried to do, this country was better off that we had 50 states where if you didn't like one, you moved around. You didn't have to have passports to go back and forth, and you had a free trade zone. So there's a lot to be said about this. But that's completely different than what Soros wants. But I just wonder whether we could grant him any benefit of the doubt that he wants it for good purposes, thinking like I do, that it is good to have an integrated voluntary world. But our problem with him is that he's willing, just to enhance special interests, and that he's not so much keen on defending individual liberty, and he sort of would magnify the armed fist of a world government, which is exactly opposite of what we would like to see.
Well, the European project was founded on the concept of subsidiarity, which is that the devolution of power to the lowest and most local level. And what's happened in practice, unfortunately, as the European government has formed, is it's gone the other way. So, as you're right, if the national borders were declining in favor of local, municipalities, that would be a positive. But Soros gives millions and millions of dollars to these organizations that are pro-UN, pro-world government.
But just look at our own country, what's happened. When I was in grade school and high school, the highest school authority was the local school board. We did have government schools, but they were very, very local. And then all of a sudden they went district-wide, and then they went statewide, and then they went to the federal government. And, of course, you have the UN involved in education all the time, so it went in the opposite direction. And this is why the basic principle of self-reliance and local control, people's self-determination, is the way to go. But unfortunately, we have gone in the wrong direction. So I see this chaos coming. I think the European Union is going to disintegrate. And then the big question comes, which way are we going to go? Are we going to go and say the nation state is a failure and we go to small units of government? Or are we going to allow those with the money and the clout and the control of the central banks to be able to unify and have a new world order? In spite of all the challenges here, I still lean in the direction that it could happen in our favor. Because if you have this huge government, and they think they're going to control us, where are they going to get the funds to do this? Eventually, hopefully, the soldiers, the young people, will refuse to fight for the UN army and the NATO armies. And in that case, it'll be local control. So I can see better things coming out of this if the chaos comes and they can't finance it. So that is why the message of liberty and independence and self-reliance is so important, that people know what they can do.
Just to educate people as to the possibilities when it does fail.
Right. And, as far as the reason for the migrants, I think, we mentioned the war is a significant part. But the economic chaos in Africa and the Middle East and our country and Europe has all been based on interventionism and welfarism and central banking. So that's all fail and contributing to it. And the welfare notion that everybody is owed a living, that means people are going to be aggressive. You've seen some of these comments about some of the migrants coming into Europe and putting on demands.
Yeah.
You know, where are my handouts?
Yeah,
And because they believe that is what liberty is about, that they have a right to be taken care of, which should not be the case. But then when you look at the phenomenal amount of debt worldwide, all the countries, and what we're existing, there's no way that's going to be paid off. So I think this problem is going to get much worse. I hope this, extreme nationalism isn't the winner, but liberty is the answer. And but it's up for grabs. But it also puts a lot of pressure on all of us to do our best. But this issue, as I said, is going to be with us for a long, long time. Because people aren't going to give up, and the system we have today is not viable. Interventionism is not viable. Us involved in around the world as a policeman of the world, it's not viable. But it's almost, well, not almost. I think it's worse now than it was when the Soviet system broke down, because we were still not as in poverty as we are today. So when our system goes and the West goes, this is going to be much, much tougher. But it's also the wonderful opportunity for us to present the case for liberty, because that is better understood now than the history of the world. It's not been implemented, but it's available to us. We have a better understanding of monetary policy and how the markets work. The Paul Krugmans of the world will be discredited. Bernanke will be discredited. The whole works, they're going to be discredited, and we're going to do away with the central banking, and we will have this opportunity. But I think this example of this migration into Europe is so symbolic of the chaos of the world, and that we're moving rapidly to a climactic end. And we should be prepared. We should be prepared for the worst, but we also should be prepared for the alternative that we can offer the world when that time comes. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Subscribe. Now, when we look at this, we are going to see it get much worse, because whether everybody involved might have good intentions. Yes, we want to open the borders and bring people in. The way it's being done, the things that are being done to do it are going to undermine the freedoms of people. And one thing that also has been proposed is, let me see if I can find it here. I want to find the article. Hold on. Sorry about this. I've seen it, but it's another one of those things where they tend to disappear, so I'm trying to have one there. This one was from Chairs Charisma News or Charisma maybe. Um, Let me click on it. But this is something that's been talked about. Yeah, it's Charisma News. Did you know that the United Nations intends to have a biometric identification cards in the hands of every single man, woman, and child on the entire planet by 2030? And did you know that a central database in Geneva, Switzerland, will be collecting data from many of these cards? And let me see. Here's a link. Here's the article. That's where it was. Okay. They linked back to the article I actually read, which was economiccollapseblog.com. I can't remember what site it was on. I read so much anymore. This one's moving towards a one world government, a one world economy, and a one world religion. It says the global elite have never been closer to their goal of a united world. Thanks to a series of interlocking treaties and international agreements, the governance of this planet is increasingly becoming globalized and centralized. But most people don't seem alarmed by this at all. In the past 30 days, we have seen some of the biggest steps towards a one world government, a one world economy, and a one world religion that we have ever witnessed, but these events have sparked very little public discussion or debate. So please share this article with as many people as you can. We need to wake up people about this before it's too late. From September 25th to September 27th, the United Nations launched a new universal agenda for humanity. Those are not my words. Those are actually come directly out of the core document for this new agenda. The Pope traveled to New York City to give the address that kicked off this conference, thus giving his considerable endorsement to this new plan. Virtually every nation on the entire planet willingly signed up for the 17 goals that are included in this plan, but the stunning turn of events made very few international headlines. The United Nations is promising that if we all work together, that we can turn our planet into some kind of utopia. But the truth is that all this talk about unity masks a very insidious agenda. The following comes from a recent piece by Paul McGuire, the author of a groundbreaking new book entitled The Babylonian Code. The UN is not asking permission but issuing a command that the entire planet will commit to 17 sustainable development goals and 169 sustainable development targets designed to radically transform our world by 2030. The UN 2030 plan promoted by the Pope will advance Agenda 21 on steroids. Through a controlled media, the mass populations will be told that this is all about saving the environment and ending poverty, but that is not the true agenda of Agenda 21. The true agenda of Agenda 21 is to establish a global government, global economic system, and global religion. The UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon spoke of a dream of a world of peace and dignity for all. This is no different than when the communists promised the people a workers' paradise. For the general population, the 2030 agenda has been rebranded as the global goals. On September 26th, some of the biggest names in the music world, including Beyonce, promoted these new global goals at the Global Citizen Festival that was held in Central Park, and you can watch a YouTube video where some of the most famous names on the entire planet urge all of us to get behind these new global goals. None of this is by accident. We are being trained to think of ourselves as global citizens that belong to a global community. Decades ago, most Americans would have been up in arms over something like this, but now most people just seem to accept these changes passively. Very powerful secret societies and international organizations have been moving us in this direction for a very long time, and most Americans simply have no idea what is happening. Here is more from Paul McGuire. The United Nations is a de facto global government and does not rule by the consent of the governed. The United Nations is a global government to which American politicians of both parties have surrendered our constitutional rights. If you look at the Republican presidential debates, you will see that a vast majority of those running are bought men and women. They are there to do the bidding of their true masters, the international banking families, and their interlocking secret societies. If a candidate has a different set of beliefs than the Orwellian groupthink, which constitutes domestic and foreign policy, he is allowed to go only so far. And I'm not going to read the rest of that, but you could kind of see that maybe with Ron Paul. Even though he had an extremely large following. Okay, I have another one here. This one from Infowars.com. Writing illegals demand entry to Britain. Trash taxpayer-funded living quarters. Riding illegal migrants housed at an army base on the island of Cyprus are demanding Britain take them in immediately. Police were called to quell the disturbance at the Royal Air Force Dikelia base. I don't know. The migrants trashed taxpayer-funded living quarters and burned tents. Many say they are no different than detainees at Guantanamo Bay. Those staying there have access to 3 meals a day, shelter, privacy, and communications, which United Nations staff have visited and say exceeds the standard of comparable setups, a spokesman for the British military said. The UK has not agreed to grant the migrants refugee status. The British Prime Minister David Cameron insists the vast majority of people who are setting off into the Mediterranean are not asylum seekers but people seeking a better life. A House of Lords EU Home Affairs Subcommittee report demands the government refer to the present crisis as a refugee crisis and allow the migrants into the country. Stephen Wolf, the migration spokesman for the UK Independence Party, said allowing thousands of illegal immigrants into Britain will bankrupt the country. For the UK to reclassify all migrants as refugees would be as big as a mistake as Mrs. Merkel's summer declaration that Germany is open to all refugees. The cost in 1 year alone in giving all migrant arrivals asylum status would bankrupt Britain, he said. And we're seeing something like that going on here, but because we are so politically correct, you can't look at a possible illegal as a possible illegal because that's discrimination. And it's really not about people wanting to come here and live, work. It's about the government and it being used for politics and government control, using it for divide and conquer. And we're going to see one of the possibilities that come out of that in Germany. Now, you heard them bring up the George Soros part of it. Let me bring this article up. Maybe. Okay. Soros's European values mean losing your national identity. Paul Craig Roberts, this is at RT.com. To be part of the European Union means to have to shred your national identity and be part of everybody. It's no longer acceptable to be yourself. This agenda serves the 1% in Washington, Paul Craig Roberts, American economist, told RT in an interview. Billionaire, financier, and philanthropist George Soros has attracted attention once again, this time saying the European Union should take at least 1 million refugees every year to ease the mass exodus of desperate people from the Middle East and Africa. Soros wants the EU to dig deep and pay an annual amount of at least €5,000 per refugee, or 20 billion euro, and this coming at a time of severe austerity measures pushed onto the European people, not to mention the bailout of entire countries like Greece. It's a little wonder that Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban says philanthropists like Soros must assume part of the blame for the current crisis. This invasion is driven on the one hand by people smugglers and on the other hand by those activists who support everything that weakens the nation state, Orban told reporters. This Western mindset and this activist network is perhaps best represented by George Soros. Soros responded by issuing an email statement to Bloomberg Business claiming his international organization works to uphold European values, while Mr. Orban's efforts to fortify the Hungarian border, thereby halting a massive wave of illegal migrants, undermine those values. His plan treats the protection of national borders as the objective and the refugees as an obstacle, Soros added. Our plan treats the protection of refugees as an objective and national borders as an obstacle. Paul Craig Roberts offers his own interpretation as to what has precipitated this crisis of epic proportions as millions of foreigners now descend en masse on European communities, many of which are totally unprepared for the influx of foreigners. It is Washington's wars, not George Soros per se, that are forcing the refugees to flee their homelands and seek to enter Europe, Roberts believes. Since the Clinton regime, we've had 32-term American presidents who have been at war, he said, they have created millions of displaced people, and they are now seeking refuge in Europe. Well, you do have to kind of blame Soros because we find out his organizations or, money that can be linked back to his organizations and him tend to always pop up in places where these, civil war type things happen. And you look at Ukraine and, I think they have a good reason to call him out on that. Roberts also asked whether Soros' advice regarding Europe absorbing millions of refugees is based on something other than just humanitarian considerations. We have to first ask the questions whether Soros' progressive causes are real or merely a cover for rule by the 1%, Roberts said. You see, when political boundaries are broken down, the result is a power vacuum which Washington and the 1% can move in their pawns. One consequence of Washington's wars over the course of 3 presidencies has been to destroy stable countries and leave in their place disorganized small fiefdoms that war on one another, Roberts said. What Soros means is European values means you lost your national identity and you become a hodgepodge of different cultures and different nationalities, and your traditional historical existence is dissolved in this pot of diverse peoples. And we see that here in America. I want to add that, and we'll get to that. But it says here, Roberts applauds Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, saying he is exactly correct that this is a threat to the existence of European peoples because they become dissolved in a so-called diverse society of different people, different religions, different cultures, different values. Now, I'm going to stop there. You can read the rest at RT. Now, when you look at the attack on cultures and the loss of national identity, meaning that a nation has to lose its identity so it doesn't offend any other cultures that decide to come there to integrate. But they're not integrating because you no longer have a identity to become. Therefore, you have extremes of different cultures fighting each other. The integration breaks down, and another thing is it doesn't allow for the freedom of expression. And we see that here in America where you can't wear patriotic symbolage. You can't, on the 4th of July, they can wear a Mexican flag, but you can't wear American flag. And what it also does is it makes a lot of the outsiders automatically go, these people are the problem. See, even the government sees their patriotic, assemblage is bad. And again, I'm a libertarian. I'm not. I have American flag, but I look at it more as a historic assemblage. I love historical things. I look at the Constitution as basically a 180 of the direction we're headed now. I see it as a step towards liberty and freedom compared to where we're headed now. Do I think it's the end all? No. but I'm also a realist and don't think that we're just going to tomorrow have a, libertarian type society. And we have to go somewhere. And I think the only successful way is to do it in a gradual step down. And I don't think the violent way would even turn out in anyone's favor, because it will cause a division that will allow a vacuum to form to allow more authoritarian governments to step in to control both sides. And if you look at a lot of the governments that we've overthrown, that we go, they're bad, and then it's just turmoil over there, what do we hear? We hear, well, if we would have left Saddam, well, yeah, it's true. It was more peaceful. They had a nicer society when these dictators were in. But you also have to look at, it's also making dictators look good. And that can be propaganda in itself. We go look at Putin. He's not a good guy, but, he's got cojones. We're looking at it the wrong way. Look at the amount of authoritarianism we look at and go, at least it's better than the Civil War. The fighting back and forth, or the extremists. Hence, we got a path called a Constitutional Bill of Rights that if we started adhering to a little bit more, and then work towards more freedom and slowly amend the Constitution to dissolve a standing federal government. Only time the federal government would come back into play is if states were under attack by a outside source trying to destroy the freedoms. Then you gradually keep bringing it down to more individual governance. Okay. Let me find this. I have one here from Reason. School choice is a moral and financial imperative. And it's a video, and I really want to play it. I think here. I might play this here in the second hour, because I do want to cover this other one that I had here from Reason real quick. This is about a 2.5-minute clip or something. Affirmative action unions, asset forfeiture, 3 Supreme Court cases to watch.
First case is Fisher versus University of Texas at Austin. If this case sounds familiar, that's because you've heard about it before. A few years ago, the court heard oral arguments in Fisher, and then a few months later, kicked the case back down to the lower courts in a very anticlimactic decision. Well, the university won once again in lower courts, and now the decision is back before the Supreme Court. So the issue here is, does the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause prevent the use of race by the University of Texas at Austin in its undergraduate admissions program? The university says it's using race in a holistic manner in an attempt to create a, quote, critical mass of underrepresented minorities on campus. Abigail Fisher, the young woman challenging this provision, argues that the university's actions violate her rights under the 14th Amendment. What the Supreme Court is going to do is going to say, A, is the school's use of race narrowly tailored to achieve a compelling government interest, and also is the school's use of race a compelling government interest in and of itself? Judging by the current makeup of the court and the fact that the court has agreed to hear this case again, then affirmative action in public universities' undergraduate admissions is in trouble. The second big case I'm watching is called Friedrich versus California Teachers Association. This is a challenge to the legal privileges enjoyed by public sector unions, specifically teachers' unions in California. The case is even more important than that because at issue is the survival of a very important Supreme Court precedent known as Abood, coming out of Michigan in 1977. And what Abood said was that teachers' unions could either require membership or require non-members, public school teachers, to pay a fee, which is the equivalent of union membership. What's going on in this case is a school teacher in California is objecting to this regime, arguing that by being compelled to pay the equivalent of union dues, she's being forced to subsidize political speech as a condition of employment, political speech that she disagrees with. The third case I'm watching is called Luis versus United States. Now, this case may not be on everyone's radar, but it's also very important, especially for those of us concerned with property rights and civil asset forfeiture. The central issue in the case is the Sixth Amendment right to an attorney. The prosecutors would like to freeze all of the assets of a woman accused of operating a complicated Medicare fraud scheme down in Florida. This woman, Miss Luis, would like to use those untainted assets to pay for an attorney, as is her right under the Sixth Amendment. The government, however, has moved successfully to freeze all of her assets before trial and would then, later on in the process, would like to seize those assets under asset forfeiture laws. So this is a case that poses important questions about the reach of the Sixth Amendment, as well as the reach of federal prosecutorial power and what sort of limits the Sixth Amendment may place upon that power.
You can also find that at Reason TV on YouTube. And all three of those I think are important things. Being forced to pay for a union if you think that they're supporting something you don't believe in. Your enslavement. We have a lot of issues, and I think there is a tide coming that's going to put politicians in America on the hot seat. I'm just hoping that we don't turn into a violent society and a society filled of hate to the point that we self-destruct. I think there's something to say about a country that can do things in a respectful and classy way where we are not harming each other. Okay. I have one here from We Are Change, the true face of tyranny that you never see. Okay, it's not want to queue up right, so we'll just go ahead and skip that. But go check out We Are Change, wearechange.org. Okay, I'm just trying to get back to these articles here. This one from truthandmedia.com dealing with Kentucky local elections. Kentucky elects Matt Bevin as governor and first African American as lieutenant governor. November 4th, history was made in Kentucky on Tuesday night when two political outsiders, Matt Bevin and Janine Hampton, were elected in the state's gubernatorial race in what was almost a landslide vote. Hampton, Kentucky's first African American lieutenant governor, is a Tea Party aligned firebrand. Born on Detroit's west side in 1958, Hampton grew up in a less than ideal financial situation. One of four daughters born to Donald and Marie Hampton, she learned to get by with very little as she watched her parents struggle to support the family. Hampton has a diverse career. She joined the U.S. Air Force, where she spent 7 years writing code and managing software such as the radar used to find enemy planes in Operation Desert Storm, where she was deployed. Then she spent 19 years in the corrugated packing industry. In 2014, Hampton ran for her first political office when she challenged the longest-serving state representative in Kentucky history. Her opponent was a Democrat, and Senator Rand Paul endorsed her in that race, but she lost. That's all the political experience Hampton had under her belt until she ran for lieutenant governor with Bevin heading the ticket. Despite being an outsider, Bevin's name is familiar to many in Republican politics. The wealthy businessman backed the Tea Party, took on Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell in the 2014 Republican primary, but was defeated. Shortly after his defeat to McConnell, Bevin hit the campaign trail again and announced his intent to run for governor. Eventually, McConnell was on board to support Bevin in the race. Taking a note from Donald Trump, Bevin mostly self-funded his campaign. Quote, I have no favors to pay back. There is not one person in this state who believes they are going to have a job in my administration. There's not one person who I promised anything to, he said last week at a dinner, according to the Washington Post. James Homan, Donald Trump is an interesting fellow, but of what people appreciate about him is the very same thing. He doesn't owe anybody anything. Still, the Republican Governors Association dumped millions into the race. For weeks, Kentucky pollsters had been calling the race for Democrat Jack Conway by at least 5 to 10%. Bevin won by 9 points. With 100% of the vote counted, Bevin led Conway with 53% of the vote compared to the Democrats' 44%, which means pollsters were off by double digits. Independent Libertarian-leaning Drew Curtis received nearly 4%. So, and I've seen mixed feelings over that whole deal. And we are coming up on the second hour here. I do want to, again, get into that Reason clip. But first, since I'm here at Truth and Media, Ben Swan put out a good one. Reality check. Can armed citizens stop mass shootings? So let's go ahead and cue this up. Hopefully it works this time.
With all the concern in this nation about mass shootings, and there is a lot of concern, it has to be asked, what about the adage that the only thing that truly stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun? Is that true? Has it ever happened? The simple answer, yes. This is a reality check you won't see anywhere else. Immediately after a mass shooting, just like what we saw at the college campus in Oregon, the questions certainly come up. What could have been done to have stopped this? Could anyone have done anything differently? Most people will say that the answer is fewer guns. But what about those who say more guns could prevent it? Here's a simple question. Has a good guy with a gun ever actually stopped a mass shooting? Reality check? They have. Well, take, for instance, in Pearl, Mississippi in 1997. 16-year-old Luke Woodham stabbed and bludgeoned to death his mother at home, then killed 2 students and injured 7 people during a mass shooting at his high school. As he was leaving the school, he was stopped by the assistant principal who had gone out to get a handgun from his car. Police reports at the time indicated that Woodham was headed to a nearby junior high to continue his attack, but we should mention that it's not known for sure. And it's also worth mentioning that the assistant principal did not stop the killings at his own school. Colorado Springs, Colorado, 2007. Matthew Murray, he killed 4 people at a church. He was armed with over 1,000 rounds of ammunition, but his shooting spree was stopped by Jeannie Assam, a church member and a volunteer security guard. Murray was knocked down, he was badly wounded, and he killed himself. It is worth mentioning here that the security guard was a former police officer, and the church had put its security team on high alert because of another church shooting earlier that day. Well, near Spartanburg, South Carolina in 2012, Jesse Gates, he went to his church armed with a shotgun, kicked in the door. But Aaron Guyton, who had a concealed carry license, drew his gun and he pointed it at Gates. The other parishioners then disarmed Gates before he fired a single shot. In 2013, 22-year-old Jacob Tyler Roberts, he walked into the Clackamas County Mall in Portland, Oregon, and opened fire. He was carrying an AR-15 rifle at the time. He killed 2 people. He injured a third. But according to a Portland TV station, another 22-year-old named Nick Maley was carrying a concealed handgun. Maley pulled his gun and he pointed it at Roberts. Roberts ran away, then shot himself in a stairwell. In a Philadelphia barber shop earlier this year, Warren Edwards opened fire on customers and on barbers after an argument with another man with a concealed carry permit, then shot the shooter. A police captain was quoted in this case saying, quote, "I guess he saved a lot of people in there," end quote. In Chicago earlier this year, an Uber driver with a concealed carry permit shot and wounded this gunman, Eduardo Custodio, who opened fire on a crowd of people in Logan Square. Now, it is important to mention here that there are also at least 2 cases, both from 2005, one in Tacoma, Washington, the other one in Tyler, Texas, when concealed carry holders attempted to stop shootings, and in both of those cases were not only unable to do so, but they were both shot. The man in Tacoma, he survived. The firearms instructor in Texas did not. So what you need to know is that when it comes to gun deaths in America, no one single answer will ever be able to completely stop mass shootings, period. As long as there are people intent on doing terrible things, they will be able to do them. But it's also important to know that in mass shootings, the desire of the gunman is to create as much damage as possible in the most high-profile way possible. They are by nature cowards. So the real question, is it even the duty or responsibility of responsibly armed people to at least try to stop them, if possible? That's Reality Check. Let's debate about that tonight on Twitter.
And we constantly have the government telling us, no, you should cower and wait for government to help you. which we always find out comes way too late. So we have a propaganda thing, and you know, it was Eric Holder that said we need to brainwash, you know, the people against guns. Paraphrasing it, but he's came out and said it, and it was caught on video. And these are the type of people that were also around during Fast and Furious. These are people that the administration surrounds themselves with. People that are willing to lie and push this type of propaganda. And it's for a more authoritarian government. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get into this Reason clip here. And this is school choice is a moral and financial imperative. And many people already know I'm a big pusher of homeschooling. Public schools, charter schools, private schools, they all are kind of going to crap. But really, it's up to you if you have a good private school or a good, you know, choice out there that you see as something that'll benefit your child. You should have the choice. We're always seeing the push to try to more centralize the control of the what the children are being taught in school, and it all leaning towards this Common Core. But this school choice is a moral and financial imperative. This is from Reason. You can go to reason.com, or you can go to Reason TV on YouTube, subscribe. Here we go.
Kids have a right to become who they're capable of being. They come to you with all these different aspects of who they are. School choice meets that need precisely.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Reason TV, and today we're talking with Lisa Graham Keegan. She was the Arizona Superintendent of Public Instruction from 1995 to 2001. As a legislator in the Arizona legislature before that, she sponsored the most comprehensive charter school law in existence. She helped create Arizona state standards. She's been an advisor to John McCain, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jeb Bush, Newt Gingrich, and she is now the head of the Keegan Company and works with A for Arizona, school choice and educational consultancy firms. And in 2013, you wrote a great memoir, which we'll talk about, Simple Choices. Lisa, you know, we talk a lot when we talk about school choice about, okay, well, this will help increase test scores, this and that. What's the moral case for school choice?
Well, because education is how people sort of fulfill their humanity. It's not a small thing. So the moral case is that kids have a right to become who they're capable of being. And the other moral case I would make is for teachers themselves to be able to innovate. You see a need, you see a way you could reach a bunch of kids. Right. You should be able to do that. And that only happens in schools that work for them. You cannot meet every child's need with a system that is just sort of, we'll get 100 more kids, we need 100 more seats, we're going to have everybody's needs met by one system, one methodology. It doesn't work.
What holds them back in a kind of traditional or a conventional public school district or model?
So if you think about a private or a charter school or a market-driven school, if you and I wanted to create a school, we'd create a model first. And I'd say, well, what do you think? How should we do this? We'd sit down, we'd get it on paper, we'd say, Nick's going to do this, Lisa will do this, we're going to reach the kids this way. This is a great way to teach. There's a model before there's a school. In the traditional system, there's a school, just because there's kids. And then if we get around to building a model, there's a model. It's a very, I think, almost a demoralizing way to approach education, which should be just incredibly energizing and quite specific. With that comes the assumption that we just do the best we can. That's my least favorite expression in the industry. And I hear it every day. Well, we've got those kids.
Yeah.
Those, capital T, capital K. Those kids. And they're, you name it. They didn't have breakfast. Their parents don't care. They don't have money. Well, they have huge capacity, so I don't know.
How does this change that model? How does it flip it or fracture it or move past it?
It really just flips it on its head. I hate the way we fund schools, right? Just everything about it. First of all, I don't like drawing geographic boundaries and giving people proxy for kids, saying, oh, look, we drew a boundary, you get to educate everybody in there.
Yeah.
Why? There's a school across the street that literally across the block outside the boundary would be better for my child. I don't like it.
So, some school districts will be able to spend $20,000 per student. Others can only scrape together $10,000. Is there a role for kind of equalization of per student funding at the state or at the federal level? Or is that just missing a bigger picture?
So I wouldn't do it at the federal level. If I had my way with the magic wand, I would ask for state-funded programs based on the needs of kids. You put the money as close to the child as possible. I started saying years ago that we should have a backpack.
Right.
Money should go in there. Wherever the kids go, the money goes, because that's obviously a choice that's going to work for that family. Or they'll move and the money will move. So that's still the system I've been chasing for 25 years. I think it works because when it works for the child, the money's available to the school.
Talk about, a number of major school districts around the country in very different areas serving very different populations have tried backpack funding or something approaching it. What have the results been so far?
So far, nobody's done it full out. So a lot of people are trying, and there are now entire companies that have come up around figuring out how to do this, how to take the old chart of accounts and move it to kids. To me, that's a marketplace sign that we're making huge progress. 20 years ago, none of those companies existed. So states are trying more and more. I know we're doing it in Arizona to try to get to transparency. What are the kids in your school worth?
Right.
Most states weight kids depending on their needs. Special ed gets more money, as it should. Learning the language gets more money, as it should. Some states weight poverty, and they give you more money for that. So that money really attaches to the child, but you don't see it at the school site, right? So that's the next game, right? Let's see it.
Talk a little bit about the scholarship programs and the tax incentives that go into that for people who don't necessarily have kids in the school system to fund school scholarships
Private
and things like
scholarships,
that are in Arizona and a couple of other places.
So in 1997, we started a tuition tax credit program, one for private schools, meaning that anybody with any income tax liability can use a portion of that and send it to a scholarship organization. And then we created another one for public schools so that they could use it for extracurriculars, a smaller amount. But that's been hugely successful. And over the past couple of years, we've added education savings accounts for private schools.
So, and that works like a medical savings account or a health savings account.
It's a debit card, and it really is money following kids.
How are the educational savings accounts funded?
They're direct. So maybe 90% of what you would get from the state, you have the ability to spend on a private school, supplemental education, et cetera.
The state says to every student?
No,
or
not to every
fund?
student. So
Okay.
particular classes of students. So students in failing schools, so that's a desperate need immediately. We offer them to students with special needs. So if your student is in one of these classes, you have the ability to use the money we would otherwise use in a traditional public school for other options.
Okay, so that's true backpack funding, really.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is direct public funding. The tax credit never becomes public money, and that was the court decision on that,
Yeah,
which
'cause
I
there was
love.
a Supreme Court ruling on
Yeah,
that.
I think you've got to have a sector of education that government doesn't touch. I really do.
I mean, at the college level, schools like Harvard, they have a bazillion-dollar endowment. They don't need money, but they'll get a lot of money. And in Arizona, is it mostly like well-off prep schools that are getting funded on that, or is it religious schools that are serving lower-income households, or what?
It's everybody. So my favorite scholarship organizations are targeted to high-need kids. We did not set an amount of money that had to go to low-income kids in that program. And I was part of that decision and thought, the market's going to run on this. These scholarship organizations are going to tend towards people without money. Let me just say that is not true, Nick. And as it turns out, people will seek ways to get these things to advantage themselves. Had I to do it all over again, I don't know what I would have done, because if you keep it just for low-income families, the political stability is less. You know, the best thing about marketplaces is
Right.
they teach us what people really want.
Right.
And the fact is, people really want these choices, and particularly in Arizona where we let it grow all through the socioeconomic sectors. A lot of charter schools are keyed on very low-income families, which is the biggest need, and that's where my heart is. The political world actually runs in wealth, and you can like that or dislike it. But the political reality around that is, that's what's going to turn the corner for Arizona.
You know, the early kind of charter school or school choice movement was geared towards low income,
That's
often
right.
minority students who were not being served by traditional public schools. But for middle class, upper middle class parents, what are the charters oriented around? What
Just high academic achievement. Really, really
so it's
internationally
like 10 years
competitive
of
schools.
calculus, all of that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, and what's really interesting, Nick, is that in suburban places, everybody thinks our schools are great. You know, they look great. I love the geraniums out front. You know, my kids are really fabulous. Yours are fabulous. We're all awesome. And then you get this school right next door to you where the kids are just kicking it. And wait, what? You're taking what? And so that over 20 years has had a massive effect in Arizona in suburban areas. And so these schools, they have wait lists all over the place. They're coming up new every year. They're the fastest growing sector of Arizona's education. And so it's just a notch above.
What are the big impediments to school choice? I mean, you know, the first charter school law was passed in
91 in Minnesota.
Okay. I mean, since then, so we went from 0 to tens of thousands of children attending charter schools.
Right.
What are the big impediments to this radical idea just that people, regardless of their income, should be able to have a choice in where their kids go to school and some say in what's going on in that school?
Well, it depends who you are, but most of the pushback comes from those who are locked into the traditional system. So local control, meaning local school districts, were meant to serve everybody's need. Wherever you live, that's your school. That's the one you have to pay. And here's another issue. One of the things we use in these boundaries are taxes for construction. And I just have a huge problem with the amount of money that gets wasted in construction and the property taxes on that. In Arizona in particular, we build these massive facilities, 20 acres standard for elementary school, 40 acres for high school. Everybody's got a stadium. There is no way to pay people to teach what you should be able to pay them if you're going to keep building those behemoth things. Well, we do that on local property taxes.
Is that partly, though, you know, it's often seen as a bug in the school funding system, but maybe it's the purpose that if you are raising taxes to build these big buildings, you create property taxes that effectively price out many people from that school district. So, you know, it's a way of maintaining a public school district that's only for people who can make X amount of money, and it kind of keeps people out.
Well, that's the effect. I don't know if that's the intention, right? I don't know that people do that intentionally. I mean, it's a noble thing to want to be on the local school board, but unfortunately we gave them the job of being local monopolists. That's a bad idea, and we gave them the wrong job. And so that the biggest pushback really comes from that tradition. And when you say we're going to also have public schools that are free to move, free to hire, free to use their money the way they want to, you hear the expression, well, they're taking our money.
Right.
Well, no, actually, we meant for the money to be for kids. The point at which we started making money about the system and not kids is when we allowed that culture to develop, which is local control means I get to school everybody and get paid for everybody.
You're not going to be able to go from school board to say, look, you've got it all wrong, do this. What's the best way to just kind of get around that or leave that in the past because it's not a conversation worth engaging in anymore?
That was a whole conversation before we passed Arizona's law in 1994 for charter schools. Up until that point, you asked your local school board, could we start an independent school? No, is the answer. It's just basically saying, we're educating everybody. In Arizona, we said, how about this? How about we just create a state board for charter schools? So if there are teachers who want to start schools, they can do it.
And
we went around.
And the funding for that would be a portion? Or
we were the first state to say all the operational funding that would go to any student is going to come out of the state general fund and is going to follow kids. It's become a problem in Arizona because the only thing growing now in Arizona is the charter system. And that is a huge weight, you know, sort of on the general fund. But that's easy to fix. And it was worth doing it to go around.
One of the questions that are asked about charter schools is that, well, they're not really accountable. What are the arguments for standards, either statewide or local standards or national standards?
So charter schools are accountable on every front, much more accountable in that they have a board that puts them into business. So you have to apply. We have to take our model to the board and say we're going to do good things. And somebody's going to say, why? prove that to us before you even start. then you have to take the same assessments everybody else takes. And just a sidebar on standards, I am a huge fan of very clear, very minimal, very obvious standards. We know what it means to read and write at certain ages. We know what it means to do mathematics. I think we limit it to that, but we make sure. I just don't get all into the kerfuffle about who made them up and who. They're really, if they're rational and they're reasonable and they're about what kids need to know and not how you get there, that's a great thing. And
so
you can
how does that play out in Arizona? You know, how do you keep it minimal as opposed to, okay, well, it's good to read and write, but then you also have to have these courses in place, whether or not we test them, but, you know, to teach citizenship or this type of hygiene or whatever?
Right. Well, I had a superintendent say to me the other day, the biggest problem we've got in Arizona right now is we're on hiatus like everybody else. We grade our schools A through F. We use the state test. Right now, everybody sort of is an A and B school. So the new test is supposed to be honest, and we're going to get a little more serious about that. But the fact of the matter is, while we don't have a grade, the superintendent was saying, look, I've had people in my office today. I'm supposed to wear a purple shirt because of domestic violence. My kids are supposed to be in a bowling program. Oh, it's football season, and the coach wants this. He said, without that assessment on the table every year with some consequence, A through F, you're going to get graded. He said, these other things just encroach, and I guarantee you, everybody loses focus.
When parents and even kids are choosing to go to a particular school, will they generate the information they need in order to make an informed choice out of consumer demand? Because I know if I have my kids and I can pick from 10 different schools, if those schools are like, just trust us, you know, we're really awesome. Or like, you know, that's going to be hard for me to take, but will that take the place, or will that supplement kind of these rudimentary state assessments?
So we're going to have state assessments for a while, Nick. In an ideal world, the one I'd like to live in, people would be so knowledgeable about indicators that you wouldn't need one state test.
Right.
But even if people were using different indicators, they would be based on roughly the same standards. I mean, it turns out the Pythagorean theorem matters, and it's exactly the same in Florida as it is in Arizona. And at some point, you have to teach it, and you have to know how to do it if you're going to understand math. What worries me is that we won't focus enough on the choices available, and that we'll start to get into process. And that does happen. You know, you have to teach this textbook, or as you say, you have to have a hygiene class or whatever. They need to be minimal, strong, honest, and that's always going to be a fight.
So talk a little bit about, it's already an issue among Republican presidential candidates, Common Core, which started out as a bunch of conservative, mostly Republican governors pushing this a decade or so ago. People like Jeb Bush, who's done very well in terms of, by most standards, or evaluations of education reform. John Kasich in Ohio. Is that the wrong way to kind of set standards, or or is it a good idea and it's just being given a bad rap in the press?
It's a good idea to have been voluntary, Nick. It really was a voluntary effort, and it was an effort to be honest. Like, if I can compare Arizona to Ohio, there's a greater likelihood, this was the theory, that we're all going to be more honest about how our kids are really doing. What creeps into it is everybody's politics. And so I have set aside the whole Common Core debate for myself and just gone around it, kind of like school choice. And you guys can all fight about that if you want to. It really has more to do with the politics of discrete ways of teaching, which really are not about the standards themselves. And I understand people's nerviness about that. I don't want you telling me I have to teach math a particular way. But I should be okay with kids in the 4th grade ought to be able to do double-digit addition. Don't care how you get there. 44 plus 22, you ought to be able to do that.
Are the Republicans really the party of school choice? And does that matter? Or is one party better than the other? Is that the wrong way to think about school choice?
I don't know if it's the wrong way to think about it. It certainly has changed over time. So the Republicans were the original party of school choice, for sure. And I think Milton Friedman, not a Republican per se, but I had a great honor to know him in my early days when I started shaping my thinking about this. And so I'm a victim of that, a happy victim. What Milton Friedman wrote about the far superior results in a marketplace driven by what people want has informed the Republican Party about school choice. Nowadays, it's hard to tell sometimes.
Yeah. Let's talk about your 2013 memoir, Simple Choices. The subtitle is Thoughts on Choosing Environments That Support Who Your Child is Meant to Be. Talk a little bit about the personal story that you kind of work through in that, and it really gets to that question of the moral case for school choice.
Right. So I wrote that because I wanted to write it while my mother was still around as a tribute to her. And her message to us constantly was, look, you got sent here for a reason. In our family, that has to do with faith. And your obligation is to develop the talents of the kids that you have and to develop your own talents and then to contribute, to the community that you live in. My mother married my biological father, who then decided that he wanted to get into the San Francisco sort of beatnik scene. And this was a guy with everything, right? Everything you would need to contribute. And he really made a choice in his life not to do that. I didn't end up meeting him until I was in my 40s, and I tell this story in the book. I met him in a homeless shelter in San Francisco, and my objection was, look, you've got this philosophy. That's really swift. I love it. You pursued your own needs. You're actually living off of somebody else's generosity in your homeless shelter, by the way. I didn't say any of this because I'm not that bold. I just drank. And so I didn't, it's not a story about how I drank through my evening with my biological father, but the point of it was my mother chose to say, look, this is not optimal choice on my part. Clearly, let's get ourselves in another environment. So that was a decision that she made, and then I ended up with a fabulous father out of that deal. What it means to me is that your obligation over and over again, once you have kids, what you do before, rock on, that's fine. Now you've got these kids. Well, you have to put them in environments that will be absolutely suited to whatever they're capable of.
And what works for one kid is not going to work for the other.
Doesn't work for another.
It's what works for one kid at one period in their life isn't going to work for them
And
later,
you're going to have to switch it up. Yeah, and they come to you with all these different aspects of who they are, which have to be embraced. It's never what you think is going to happen, but school choice meets that need precisely. And so for me, it's not just theoretical interest. For me, it's what it means to be a human being, what it means to really give people their own capacity, their ability then to give back.
I only wish that I had grown up in the schools that you're describing.
Hopefully more kids will.
Lisa, thanks so much for talking to us.
Thanks. It's a privilege.
For Reason TV, I'm Nick Gillespie.
Reason TV, Reason.com. Now, I disagree with the whole Common Core thing because it's not just teaching them how to. You will see in a lot of math problems that if they get the correct answer, that would be wrong. If they get the wrong answer, as long as they can show how they got it, it's right. It's teaching them how to do everything a more difficult way that takes longer, which will make them less effective maybe in a job. You got that jobs report? It's going to be another week. It's taking me forever. You have to have school choice, and problem is they're basing standards around it, and the curriculum has to meet those standards. Therefore, the curriculum ends up being Common Core. And so you have, and states like Indiana just changed the name rather than get rid of it. We'll change the name, no one will know. They won't hate us. So even private schools will be using Common Core books so they can answer Common Core standard testing the correct way, because it is a standard based on a curriculum. They go, it's not a curriculum based on a standard. No, it's a standard based on a curriculum. Therefore, you have to implement the curriculum. So, yeah, it is. Vice versa. Now, I think the best thing would be get government completely out of education. But I don't see that happening. Okay, give me a second here. Let's get this next article up. This one from truthandmedia.com. Trump, Fed Chair Yellen not raising rates because Obama told her not to. At a press conference at Trump Tower in New York City on Tuesday, 2016, Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump said interest rates should be raised and accused Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen of politicizing monetary policy. When a reporter asked Trump whether he believes that the Federal Reserve should raise interest rates from long-held record low levels, Trump replied, "The question is, should the Fed raise rates? They are not raising them because Obama has asked them not to raise them. In my opinion, he wants to get out of office because we are in a bubble, and when those rates are raised, a lot of bad things are going to happen, or potentially going to happen. And in my opinion, Janet Yellen is highly political, and she's not raising rates for a very specific reason, because Obama told her not to, because he wants to be out playing golf in a year from now, and he wants to be doing other things. And he doesn't want to see a big bubble burst during his administration." He added Janet Yellen should have raised the rates. She's not doing it because the Obama administration and the president doesn't want her to, and if she does it, you see what happens every time there's even a thought of raising them just a little bit. Reuters reported that Trump then laminated what he described as the U.S. dollar's lack of competitiveness, and said if you look at the currency devaluations of China and Japan, of many, many different countries, they're making it impossible for our companies to compete with them because we don't have leaders that know how to say to China, don't do that, because if you do that, we're going to put a big fat tax on you. White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest brushed off Trump's comments in a Tuesday press conference and said that the Obama administration goes to great lengths to enable the Fed to set monetary policies that benefit the U.S. economy. We've talked about interest rates a lot on this broadcast, and I've been saying for a long time, you know, they should have already raised interest rates, and it is creating a bubble. And you know, that's one reason I've been like, you know, gold, silver, buy now. Why they're creating this bubble, because when this bubble bursts, it's going to hurt. And Trump is actually telling a lot of the truth right there. And one thing he mentioned was look at every time they even mention raising interest rates or have a discussion about interest rates, the market freaks out, and for good reason, because they're trying to go, oh, are they going to pop the bubble right now? Oh, no, they're not. We're okay. Are they going to pop the bubble? No, not yet. Are they going? Oh, okay. And the longer they keep the interest rates low like this, it's going to create a bigger and bigger bubble. And with the inflation that'll come after that, gold and silver are going to be things you definitely are going to want to have. Just to kind of mention, Bitcoin has had a tremendous upswing, and there's a good article at FEE. I'll go ahead and pull this up here. FEE.org, Foundation for Economic Education. Everyone is talking about Bitcoin. I'm getting a flurry of messages. How do I buy Bitcoin? What is the best article? Explain this stuff. How to answer the critics. Might try here, and here. Markets can be unpredictable, but the way people talk about markets is all too predictable. When financial assets go up in price, they become the topic of conversation. When they go way up in price, people feel an itch to buy. When they soar to moon, people jump in the markets and ride the price all the way back down. Then while the assets are out of the news, they disappear from the business pages and only the savviest investors buy. Then when they ride the wave up, this is why smart money wins and dumb money loses. It's been this way for 7 years with Bitcoin. When the dollar exchange rate is falling, people get bored or even disgusted. When it is rising, people get interested and excited. The challenge of Bitcoin is to see through the waves of hysteria and despair to take a longer view. In the end, Bitcoin is not really about the dollar exchange rate. It's about its use as a technology. If Bitcoin were only worth a fraction of a penny, the concept would already be proven. It demonstrates that money can be a digital product created not by government or central banks, but rather through the same kind of ingenuity that has already transformed the world since the advent of the digital age. When the Bitcoin white paper came out in October 2008, only a few were interested. 5 years would pass before discussion of the idea even approached the mainstream. Now we see the world's largest and most heavily capitalized banks, payment processing companies, and venture capitalists working to incorporate Bitcoin's distributed ledger into their operations. In between then and now, we've seen wild swings of opinion among the chattering classes. When Bitcoin hit $30 in February 2013, people were screaming that it was a Ponzi-like bubble designed to collapse. I've yet to see a single mea culpa post from any of these radical skeptics. It's interesting how the insanity wrong slink away, making as little noise as possible. For the last year, the exchange rate of around $250. But because this was down from its high, people lost interest. What is considered low and what is considered high are based not on fundamentals, but on the direction of change. The recent history of cryptocurrency should have taught this lesson. No one knows the right exchange rate for Bitcoin. That is something to be discovered in the course of market trading. There is no final answer. The progress of technology and the shaping of economic value knows no end. On its 7th birthday, Bitcoin broke from its hiatus and spiked to over $350, on its way to $400. And so, of course, it's back in the news. Everyone wants to know the source of the last price run-up. There is speculation that it is being driven by demand from China, where bad economic news keeps rolling in. There has also been a new wave of funding for Bitcoin enterprises, plus an awesome cover story in the Economist magazine. Whatever the reason, this much is increasingly clear. Bitcoin is perhaps the most promising innovation of our lifetimes, one that points to a future of commodified, immutable, and universal information exchange. It could not only revolutionize contracting and tilting, it could become a global currency that operates outside the nation state and banking structures as we've known them for 500 years. It could break the model of money monopolization that has been in operation for thousands of years. Those of us in the Bitcoin space are aware of the sheer awesomeness of the technology, can grow impatient, waiting for history to catch up to technical reality. We are daily reminded that technology does not descend on the world on a cloud in its perfected form, ready to use by the consuming public. It arrives, it fits and starts, it's subjected to trials and improvement, and its applications tested against real-world conditions. It passes from hand to hand in succession with unpredictable winners and losers. You can read the rest of the article there. But it is on a upswing now. Okay, I have one here from AMTV. What you need to know about the Sanaya plane crash. And we have Russia saying that terrorists had nothing to do with it. Terrorists come back and say, yes, we did. And, it perhaps could be that blowback for Putin joining Assad against rebels and ISIS. And this is something that we warn about in America all the time. And instead of going, okay, we won't cause problems overseas, they go, well, we'll just create a police state at home. There, you'll be protected. And it's BS. But is Putin getting blowback? And I think it's possible. But here we go.
Get the new concealable NIJ Level 3A certified Kevlar armor bundle from Fortress Survival, LLC. Ultimate protection for the ultimate prepper. Hey, everybody. I'm Christopher Green, and you're tuning into AMTV, Alternative Media Television. Today's date is Monday, November 2nd, 2015. In today's video, you'll learn what you need to know about the Sinai plane crash, and also I'll talk a little bit about selective reality, of which I will elaborate later on in this video. So over the weekend, you probably tuned in, a plane commercial airliner flying at roughly 30,000 feet, a Russian commercial airliner, disintegrated in midair over the Sinai Peninsula. And officials coming from Russia and also Egypt, although those stories are conflicting, and ISIS on the ground is laying claim, terrorist elements on the ground are laying claim to the downed plane, officials are telling us not to panic and also not to jump to conclusions. Even though it seems like a plane goes mysteriously missing or is shot down pretty frequently now, whether or not it's flight MH370, which just disappeared off radar, just vanished out of thin air, and our intelligence agencies around the world still can't find it, even though they said that they found a plane part on Reunion Island months later, which we know is pretty much bullshit. I mean, Reunion Island, really? You kidding me? Is that easy of a story to put together by the mainstream media and government officials to quell the quote-unquote conspiracy theories? And breaking news, folks. Amazing breaking news, courtesy of CNN, the bullshit mainstream media network. According to them, based on total and utter bullshit and circumstantial evidence, flight MH370 has been found. They found it, allegedly, in the Reunion Islands. While a cleanup crew was cleaning up, I guess, the island, and found a part that kind of, maybe, sort of, looks like a part from a plane that they suspect could maybe, sort of, kind of, circumstantially be the same part of the Boeing 777 that happened to be a part of flight MH370. Yeah, that's right. They found it. Circumstantially. Kind of. So this plane goes down, and officials are telling us not to panic. And again, my heart goes out. Very tragic. I think there was 14 children on board. Absolutely horrible. My heart sunk when I heard about it. Again, this video isn't meant to disregard the deaths, those people that died in any way, but to question the official mainstream boob tube narrative, which 99.9% of the time is a bold-faced lie. Again, this is what these government officials do through the mainstream media, which is obviously owned by the gigantic multi-billion-dollar corporations that also select our politicians, whether or not it's here in America, Europe, and or abroad. So the plane goes down. They tell us not to jump to conclusions, that it's going to take months and months of investigation before they can figure this out. Now, there is some credence to the claim that it would be very difficult to shoot with a surface-to-air missile, let's say the plane down, from 30,000 feet up in the air. That's quite high. I think it was about 15, 20 minutes from its takeoff. So there is some credence to that story. Typically, you're only going to have a range of maybe 15,000 or so, give or take a few thousand, with a surface-to-air missile without some kind of superior technology on the ground. Doesn't mean that that doesn't exist. So let's just say we rule out the surface-to-air missile. You know how SEAL Team 6 went down conveniently? What was it, like 19 of the members that allegedly killed Osama bin Laden just died because, again, dead men don't speak. Let's just erase that from the probability mix for a minute and say it wasn't a surface-to-air missile. Well, it still could have been a bomb placed on the plane prior to takeoff, right? That's still possible. I mean, again, the plane disintegrated in mid-air. There were no maydays, according to Egyptian officials, although Russian officials are telling us that the captain and I think a wife of one of the co-captains said that he was less than impressed before takeoff regarding the condition of the plane. Now, let's keep in mind, Russia would have a self-interest, Vladimir Putin would have a self-interest to cover this up if ISIS was in fact, or a terrorist group, of which, by the way, they're airstriking right now, were to bring down this commercial airliner. There would be tremendous self-interest to spin this story to basically not embarrass themselves in front of the world and through the public media narrative that is being created. Keep in mind, again, Russia has been airstriking ISIS in places like Syria for several weeks now, even though people like John McCain got it totally and absolutely 110% wrong, even though Obama had been running his own air campaign anti-constitutionally since September 2014 last year without a congressional vote and or approval of the American public, which, of course, is an illegal act. So this story, this Sinai plane crash, certainly raised my eyebrow over the weekend. Again, my heart goes out to the victims, the children, my heart sunk upon hearing about it. I do think that there are still several questions outstanding. It still could have been some kind of surface-to-air missile. There is technology available today that could have a range greater than 15,000, 16,000 feet that could hit a plane at 30,000 feet. That is certainly possible. And also, let's not rule out the possibility that there could have been terrorists on the plane, that a bomb could have been ignited on the plane after takeoff, something could have been planted prior to takeoff on the runway, etc. We don't really know. And of course, by the time all of this is unearthed, we won't get the entire truth. We really won't get the truth. Just like flight MH17, just like flight MH370. They're able to massage the truth into this selective reality, which is what the mainstream media does time and time again. Again, owned by the corporate interests, the multi-billion-dollar corporations that also select our politicians and have control over populations through the most powerful entity on the planet, the mainstream media. So let's talk a little bit about selective reality. I was debating with a family member of mine over the weekend who I very much respect, who's also very intelligent, but we disagree clearly on many things. And we were talking about the Hillary Clinton email scandal and also, most notably, the fact that Obama, even though he had promised in his original campaign speeches in 2008, on and on, I ran a clip for about a minute long of this in the last video we posted on Friday, promising to withdraw troops from Iraq, promising to end the wars from the Middle East, only to send more boots on the ground, according to our Pentagon. All of this was admitted last week. And in addition to that, starting new wars in places like Syria with these air campaigns, again, without any congressional approval, vote by the general public, just executive action by the President of the United States. And this person went on to tell me, through their selective reality, that Obama didn't lie to the American people. He just got it wrong. And, the facts change. Just because Obama ran on the entire platform of hope and change and also to withdraw our troops, he says that they did do that, just a few years ago. They withdrew some troops, and because he withdrew some troops, even though they're sending more back now, far more boots on the ground now, and he started new wars in new countries in places like Syria, that's okay because it makes up a part of this liberal bias selective reality that the President of the United States wasn't lying to us. He had good intentions, but the facts changed. Just like Hillary Clinton blowing up her email server was all in the best interest of the American public. Of course, we know that's bullshit. But you see, there's where lies the rub. There is where the difference between people like me, many of you tuning in with a thinking cap on, with a critical thought process. Not that this other person doesn't have a critical thought process, but that's the difference in that people that actually think these politicians have their best interests at heart, think that our government officials are actually acting on and for the benefit of the general public, versus people like me that have an inherent gross distrust for our government officials, politicians, and bankers in general. Now, let's not forget that our founding fathers had an inherent gross distrust also. It's basically the founding principle of this nation and this country. One of the reasons they came up with the Constitution. We've had this great free land for just a couple hundred years before screwing it up. And so that's what I find really amazing, and I think that's where lies the rub. I think that's the critical point, and it's something that we need to penetrate further, is that people, the gross majority of people in this country really aren't awake to what's going on behind the scenes. They don't understand the concept of self-interest, these selfish politicians and bankers basically committing crimes, people like Hillary Clinton blowing up their email servers only because it serves their best interests and not the best interests of the American public. Just like the U.S. government lied about the transfer of weapons through Libya, what is now known as the Greater Benghazi Gate conspiracy, which is no longer a conspiracy, it's all factual, where the U.S. government had been transferring guns to armed terrorists on the ground in Syria to hopefully take out Bashar al-Assad and his government. The same thing was done, of course, with Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. The same thing was done with Saddam Hussein. And they've attempted the same thing in Syria, but have failed recently. Bashar al-Assad obviously still has power. And as a result of U.S. meddling, we've only had 500,000 people wind up dead in this country, and millions, according to third-party reports, 1 million plus in places like Iraq. So it all goes back to kind of this selective reality. When you wake up to the fact that our politicians really don't have our best interests at heart, that they're lying to us through the mainstream media, that basically everything that's coming out of their mouth is 110% bullshit, that is life-altering. That changes your entire perception of the world. And it's also extremely discomforting to think that your politicians aren't looking out for the best interest of the country, that they actually could be acting in very sinister, psychopathic ways. The same thing regarding September 11th. I mean, if the federal government was in on it and they actually were responsible for murdering thousands of innocent Americans, that's really tough to come to terms with. It would mean that your government, your officials here in the United States, were murderers. And most Americans can't sleep at night if they were to think that way. Can't sleep at night thinking that the banksters who bailed themselves out with trillions of dollars post the crash of 2008 and 2009 weren't looking out for them. It's much easier to believe the large fabricated lie that it was in the best interest of the.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. We're coming towards the end of the broadcast. There's about 3.5 more minutes there. And what's going on? You know, we have U.S. moderates in Syria, Turkmen and rebranded Islamists. This out of Infowars.com. Kurt Nemo. But it says that. Give me a second, sorry. Mayadeen and Arab-owned satellite television channel in Lebanon claims U.S. military advisors are training Turkmen rebels in Syria. Pentagon says it's working with local fighters against ISIS in northern Syria. American officers began training Turkmen militants around Salma in the Latakia province. Al-Mayadeen reported citing an unnamed military source. Latakia is where Russia has set up an airbase. Syrian military sources cited by RIA Novosti say that no ISIS or IS forces currently hold positions in the northern Latakia. Instead, the Syrian Turkmen militants are fighting alongside the al-Nusra Front extremists against the Syrian army, RT reports today. On October 30th, Obama authorized a contingent of fewer than 50 commandos to deploy into northern Syria and work with moderate opposition forces who are fighting the militants. On November 1st, the Anadolu Agency, a Turkish government news outlet, reported Turkey and the U.S., supported by local Turkmen forces, have begun staging ground assaults and airstrikes against positions held by Daesh terrorist group near the Syrian-Turkish border. The force includes troops from Sultan Murad Division of the Syrian Turkmen Brigades and the Damascus Front. The Turkmen, under the auspices of Ankara, are as interested in fighting the Kurdish People's Protection Units as they are fighting the Islamic State in Syria. The YPG is considered a terrorist group by the government of Turkey. All of this meddling in foreign affairs is going to bite us in the butt. You'd think we would have learned our lessons. Where's the anti-war left? You know, where are they? They're nowhere to be found. The anti-war left, as soon as Obama got in office, sat on their butts and did nothing as he goes to war. There's another good article. This one out at MWC News. Sheldon Richman was the author. America's non-representative war government. AUMF is an unconstitutional delegation of power from Congress to the president. And quote here, the success of government, the late historian Edmund Morgan wrote, requires the acceptance of fictions, requires the willing suspension of disbelief requires us to believe that the emperor is clothed, even though we can see that he is not. Representation is chief among those fictions. Just as the escalation of the king could be a means of controlling him, Morgan continued, so the exaltation of the people can be a means of controlling them. If the representative consented, his constituents had to make believe that they had done so. And that's how they control a populace. When a representative goes along with a bill that the people he's supposed to be representing, in mass don't approve of, he's not fulfilling his duty. But he will get away with it because people have gone along with it. And that's how they get away with it. Every day, to the point that we constantly turn around and go, I don't know what country I live in anymore. This is not this free society I was told that we were creating. But you have these globalists that have come out and said that they don't want a free society. They want a society with centralized control. And to centralize control, the more you centralize it, the more you have to have a police state. The more control you have to have over people. When they don't do what you want, you bomb them. You divide and conquer. You control through those mechanisms. And that's what they're doing. That's what they're doing in these areas that we are basically commencing war. They do it in our society. And they're breaking society down to a point where there is no respect, there is no morals. It's a self-interest that is not a guided self-interest, where you go, I want to travel the world. I'm going to find or make a career traveling the world. It's more, I want to travel the world. I don't want to have to do anything, and I'm going to blame everybody else for that. And it basically plays again, it's that division. Class warfare, racial warfare, religious warfare. It's a continuation of divide and conquer. And it keeps us from going after the real problems. And it's the control mechanisms that hold people down and continue to get them to fight with each other, blaming each other for the government holding you down. It's a mechanism of government that allows corporations or special interests to hold other people down that they don't agree with. That's an idea that we have to shed. And we better pay attention to the United Nations and what they're planning to do. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Stay tuned here on UCY for all the great broadcasts coming up after this. And definitely check out Sundays here on UCY.tv. Really great lineup. Don't forget to support UCY. Go to UCY.tv and click the UCY support tab. This is something that has been funded out of pocket by the network, so the network owner, and it's something that we need your help to be able to continue to operate the way we do and give a platform for so many different voices to get out there and continue to spread freedom and knowledge. Thank you all for tuning in. Don't forget to stay tuned here on UCY.TV.